Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Quarriors. This is the Quarmageddon expansion box, but in the video, we're just going to take a look at Quarriors. Quarriors is a dice building game in which players are competing to get the most glory. Let's jump right in with the description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks. This is Quarriors set up for a two-player game. To set up, each player is going to pick a color and place the matching glory marker beside the one space of the glory track. Aside from that, each player is going to take 8 white quiddity dice, which are these ones here, and 4 assistant dice, which are these here, and then put them in their bag. You can see them laid out here. The black players are already in his bag. In all games, you're always going to use the 3 basic cards, which are the quiddity card, the assistant card, and the portal card. You're going to put 5 dice on the portal and 2 on the assistant. Then you're going to shuffle the creature deck and reveal cards one at a time until you get 7 unique creatures. So if you reveal a creature that already has a matching picture to one on the board, like in this case, if we revealed this creature and there's already one of the same picture here, we would not put it out. But once we get 7 unique ones, we're going to do the same thing with spells, and we need 3 unique spell pictures out of that deck here, and by the end you're going to have 7 creatures, 3 spells, and always the same 3 basic cards like you can see here. On all these cards, the creatures and spells, you're going to take the 5 matching dice from the box and place them on the card. During the game, players take turns composed of 5 phases, which are score creatures, draw, roll, and ready dice, attack rivals, capture quarry, and move dice to the used pool. The game ends when one player reaches the required number of glory. You can see in a 2-player game, it's 20 glory, while in a 3-player game, 15, and a 4-player game, 12. So it ends immediately if somebody does that. Or at the end of a player's turn, if 4 of the creature cards, not the spells, not the basic, 4 of these creature cards here have no dice on them at the end of a turn, then just whoever has the most glory at that time wins. Before we go through the 5 phases of a turn in detail, I do want to point out that this is the back of the rulebook, but it serves nicely as a play area for both players. So with that, the first part of a player's turn is to score creatures, and they have to score all their creatures in the ready area. It's mandatory, and to do that, you just take them and you move them to the used pile. Now, there is some differences at this part between the basic rules of the game and the expert rules of the game. In the basic rules of the game, anybody you score, you're going to gain glory equal to their value. So for instance, if you was to score this guy here, you would just take him, put him in your used pile, and you would gain the glory indicated on here. So you would just move up accordingly on this track. And then for each guy you score, you can cull any dice in your used pile, including the die that you just scored itself. And to cull a die means you take it off your board and return it to its card, so it's no longer going to be in your dice bag for later use in the game. However, in the expert rules, you can only gain glory for a die if you choose to cull that die itself, and that's the only die you could cull. So in this example, we would still score this as normal, but we're not necessarily going to gain points for it unless we choose to cull it. If we cull it, then we would put it back here, and we would gain the 4 glory. Also, you can't cull anything you want. It has to be the things that are scored that are culled. So you can only cull creatures. You're never going to be able to get rid of your quiddity, for instance, in that case. It's also important to note this is the only phase of the turn, the score creatures phase of the turn, where you cannot cast spells, but more information on that later. Also, if a player ever reaches the required number of glory to win the game, they immediately win. The game stops at that time, even though it's the first phase of a turn. After scoring all creatures in the ready area and deciding whether or not to cull them to gain glory in the expert rules, the active player is going to draw 6 dice from their bag and place them in their active pool. So you're just going to draw these out like so. So that would be 3 here, and then 3 more if I can get my hands on them. And then you're just going to roll them and place them in your active pool. And now that they're in their active pool, you can use them later in your turn. Also want to point out, if your bag was ever empty, you're just going to draw as many as you can, and then take your whole used pile, put it back into your bag, and draw until you have 6. And then once you have 6, you're going to roll them. Some dice have immediate effects that will be spent when used, so you would just spend them and put them in the spent pile here. There is one exception to that, and that's the re-roll here. You essentially just take that dice and re-roll it if you'd like to. But there are some abilities like this one here, which if you wanted to use, you would spend it, which says draw 2 more dice from your bag and roll them, and that would just be in the spent pile. You can no longer use that. Also, you can summon creatures at this time. If you rolled any creature faces, for instance, this is a creature face, you can always identify a creature face because it will have a picture on it. It will have 3 numbers along the outside. It may also have some asterisks down here, but more on that in a second. But any creature die you roll, you may summon by paying its cost in quiddity from your active pool to your spent pile. The cost is always this top number up here, so we can see this guy costs 1. So if I wanted to summon him, I would pay 1 quiddity to the spent pile and move him up to the ready area. He would now be summoned for the rest of the turn. And if he survived to the following turn, he would be scored as discussed in the previous phase. You can summon any number of guys as long as you can pay individually for all their costs. So if we had this guy, he could also pay the 3 quiddity to summon him as well. Spells can always be summoned for free if you have the correct face showing, so they would just come up here at no additional cost if you'd like to ready them. A lot of the creatures also have special abilities that you can see on their cards next to various asterisk symbols, but they only have these if that side of the die is rolled. So for instance, if this goblin here has this 1 asterisk showing, he can use his 1 asterisk ability here, which basically gives him more defense. But if this side is rolled and summoned, he doesn't have that asterisk there, so he doesn't have that ability. Also, characters only get their abilities if they're summoned, because when they're down here, they're just dice. They don't actually become creatures till they're up here in the ready area. The next phase of the turn is to attack your rivals, and we're just a two-player game, so you're only attacking the other player. But if there's 3 or more players, you're attacking all of them simultaneously and equally with the same amount of attack power. The way you figure out your attack power is you add up the attack power on all your summoned creatures, and that's this number up here, so that would be 1 plus 8 in our case, so the attack power would be 9. So we'd be attacking all opponents at the same time with 9 attack power. You may also cast spells at this time if you have them in your ready area to increase your attack power to do other things. There are 2 types of spells essentially. One are immediate effects, which you would just use and you would move them to the spent area. So you would do what this card says and it would go right to spent. However, there are also attached spells like this one here that say attach on them. Then you're just going to attach that to one of your creatures and do what it says for that creature. One creature can have any number of dice attached to it, but just to attach it, you just kind of put it next to it. So now if this guy ever scores, he'll be worth additional glory. So after you cast any spells you want to, each of your opponents is going to take the full amount of your attack, and they're going to do it individually in turn order. They also have an opportunity to apply any reactive spells or any creature abilities they might have in their ready area. But this is only targeting creatures in their ready area, and they must first pick one to defend against the damage. So in this example, let's pretend this guy has these 3 guys here, and he's being attacked by this player with an attack power of 9, as we've already discussed. He has to decide which of these guys is going to take the full 9 damage. He cannot divide it between them, but for instance, if he chooses to put it to this guy has a defense of 2, so he will be defeated. When you're defeated, you go to the used pile, but the rest of these guys are going to have to defend against the remaining 7 damage. So this guy might take the next group, and he's worth 6, so there's 1 left, and this guy would defend against that, but he has 4 defense, so nothing happens. If the damage equals or exceed the defender's defense value, that defender is going to be moved to the used pile. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen to that guy. After you finish resolving the defense of one player, you're going to move on to the next player again with the full attack value. It's not reduced by anything this guy took in damage. But once everybody is either defended totally or has lost all of their guys, you're going to move on to the next step, which is buying new dice. When buying new dice, you're just going to move quiddity from your active pool to your spent pile to buy some dice from the group. You can always see the cost in the top here. So for instance, this costs 8, while this up here costs 1. He only has 1 quiddity to spend, so if you wanted to buy something, it's probably going to be this. In the basic rules of the game, you're only allowed to buy a maximum of 1 thing per turn. However, in the expert rules, you can default buy up to 2 things. In the example playthrough, we will be allowing players to buy up to 2 things if they'd like to. But I do want to point out, if 4 of these creature cards, again, not spells or basic cards, are ever out of dice, that player's turn will end immediately, and whoever has the most glory wins. It's also important to note that once a spell is attached to a creature, that spell is going to go wherever that creature goes. So if it's destroyed and goes to the used pile, that spell is also going to go to the used pile. As the final act of a player's turn, they're going to move everything in their spent pile and their active pile to the used pile. So for instance, let's pretend he didn't summon this guy or spend these 2 quiddity. These are all going to go to the used, as are these. You can also choose to move non-attached spells, because this spell is going to go wherever this guy goes, to the used pile as well from your ready area. Once the active player has completed these 5 phases, play is going to proceed clockwise to the next player taking a turn just like that one. The game ends in one of 2 ways. Immediately whenever somebody reaches the required number of glory to win, in which case they're the winner, or if 4 of these creature cards ever do not have any dice left on them, at which point the game stops immediately, and whoever has the most glory wins. Let's go in with this example playthrough. The first thing players have to do is determine which creatures will be used in the game. The way they do that is they shuffle up this deck. They're going to reveal the creatures one at a time. As long as a creature revealed does not match the picture showing any other creature already revealed, it's going to be added to the pool, like so. This one here matches this one, so it's set aside. It's not going to be used in the game. You're going to continue doing this until you get 7 creatures total. So once you get 7, you're going to move on to the spells, and you're going to need 3 different pictured spells in just the same way. So we're going to flip the spells one at a time. This one actually matches that one, so it's not going to be used. And then these are all different pictures, as are all these, so you're ready to go. From there, you're just going to take the dice from the supply. You're going to place all the matching groups on the matching card, and once all the things are set up, you're ready to start the game. The first phase of the turn is to score anything in your ready area, but there's obviously nothing in any player's ready area yet. So we're going to move on to the second part, which is drawing and rolling the dice. We're going to start with the red player down here. So he's going to draw 6 dice from his bag, and he's going to roll them in his active pool at this time. He should shuffle these up so he doesn't get all the same stuff, but that's 5 there, so he needs 1 more. He's going to take them, he's going to roll them, he's going to put them in this group here. He does have 1 re-roll, so he's going to re-roll this die, and now he's got a whole bunch of quiddity. He doesn't have anything he can summon or anything like that, so we're going to move on to the next phase, which is attack your rivals. Obviously, he's not going to be attacking any rivals because he doesn't have anything summoned in his ready area. So with that, we're going to move on to the capture quarry phase, where he can buy cards from this group. Normally, you can only buy 1, but since we're playing with the advanced rules, you're allowed to buy up to 2. He has 5, 6, 7, 8 quiddity at this time, so he could buy 1 thing up to cost 8, or he could buy several things of a lower cost. He decides he's going to go ahead and buy this thing here, the Quake Dragon, for a cost of 8, so he's going to move all that quiddity to his spent pile. He's going to pick up a Quake Dragon die, put it in his used pile. And with that, everything in his spent pile and active pool goes to his used, and the next guy's going to take a turn just like that. But we're going to jump ahead a little bit later in the game so you can see some more interesting situations. Welcome back. We progressed a bit in the game. You see both players have some different types of dice out there, and both have some glory as well. It's this guy's turn, so the first part of his turn is to score creatures in his ready area. He has 2 here, and in all cases, whether you're playing basic rules or expert rules, they're going to move over here to the used pile because they have scored. Now, if you're playing the expert rules, you're actually going to have to cull them to gain glory for them. But in the basic rules, you're going to gain their glory no matter what. So in the basic rules, you know this guy's going to get 4 for this card here and 2 for this here, that he would advance at that time 6. Then he'd be able to cull any 2 because he scored 2, so he would probably cull these 2 quiddity by putting them back. But in the expert rules, you do not gain the glory unless you cull that die itself. So even though this is worth 4, he'd really like to keep that Quake Dragon in his dice bag, so he's not going to cull it. He is, however, going to cull this guy, so he's just going to get 2 points in the expert rules. Then he's going to continue with his turn as normal. He's going to draw 6 dice from his bag. He only has 5, so he's going to put everything in his used pile back into his bag to draw that 6th one. Then he's going to roll it and take a turn just like the others. So he's got a spell here, so he's going to put that spell up there, and then he's got a whole bunch of quiddity. He decides he's going to go ahead and use that spell, which essentially allows him to just destroy one other guy's monster. So this guy's going to move over here, and that spell is now spent. So with that, he's got 4, 5, 6, 7 quiddity. He decides he'd like to buy a questing wizard at this time. So with that, goes back to this guy. We're going to jump ahead closer to the end of the game so you can see the final situation. Welcome back. We're approaching the end of the game. The black player just rolled his dice, so they're in the active pool here. He has a spell, which he's going to ready for free. Then he's going to use it, which gives him extra 2 quiddity. He's going to use those 2 quiddity to summon this guy here, and then he's going to have to attack this guy over here. Now, he has an attack power of 3, but the Quake Dragon's defense on this dice side is 6, so that attack does nothing to the Quake Dragon. Then he can spend these 4 dice if he'd like to buy something. He'll go ahead and he'll buy a Warrior of the Quay. But with that, it's the other guy's turn, so now he has the opportunity to score. Remember, you can only gain glory for a dice you choose to cull while scoring in the expert version of the game, but he's going to go ahead and he's going to cull that Quake Dragon, so that's worth 4 glory, which brings him over that threshold of 20, so the red player wins the game. In many ways, Quarriors is the dice building game. Because of the nature of dice, there can be a reasonable amount of randomness in this game, but the glory requirements keep it to a fun length, even if you're not the player that comes out on top that time. Also, I do recommend you use the culling advanced rule, because I find that makes the game much more interesting. Otherwise, it tends to just be an exercise in buying the most expensive thing you can every turn, because that will often be the best creature. But with the advanced culling rule, you have to actually cull that creature to score points for it, so sometimes you may not want to do that, because then it'll be out of your dice bag. So there's some interesting decisions that come along with that sort of mitigate the randomness of the game. The game, though, is a lot of fun, and if you like rolling dice and chucking dice, this is probably a good one for you. Also, it combines that element of deck building, so people that are into the deck building side of things might enjoy this as well. So if it looked neat to you, check it out. That's Quarriors.